Berlin. Hi, my name is Matthias Rillig, and this is a short video about how to cite references properly. Now, this is a problem that we encounter in our lab, for example, in form of bachelor thesis, master thesis, sometimes also for PhDs, and just generally manuscripts that I review internally or that I get as a reviewer. And so this is basically from years of seeing these kinds of issues. And this is to share with you how citations should be used properly. For example, in the introduction of your thesis or your paper. And it's actually quite simple, but it requires effort to do it properly. And so the first rule is, if you make a broad statement, you need to support it with a broad type of citation and reference. Like if you say something about plants photosynthesize, well, maybe you don't need a reference for that, but imagine a generally broad statement like soil stores a lot of carbon. Then you cannot cite a primary literature paper that somewhere in the introduction may have also made that statement. That would be an incorrect way of citing a source. If you have a broad statement like, say, soils contain a lot of carbon, you need to support that with a broad reference. For example, that would be a review paper or an entire book or a book chapter. So if you look at some very good introductions, you will find that if there's broad statements, they're supported with broad sources. The opposite, if you make a specific point, let's say carbon is stored inside of soil aggregates where it's stabilized, something like this, then you need to cite a more specific source that is usually a primary literature paper that showed this exact point. And it is not nearly as appropriate to cite a more general source for this. Maybe that mistake is not as terrible as the first one, but it's basically just a sign of laziness. So you essentially you didn't bother to look up who showed this for the first time, or this more specific point that you're trying to make, if it's important for your argument, but you just cited instead some general source like a book chapter, a review, or a book where probably it's in there somewhere. And we've all done that at some point or another. But to do it properly, if you have a very specific statement in your introduction, make sure you support it with that specific reference that did exactly that and provided the evidence for it. Then I'm sometimes asked, well, should I cite old papers or should I cite new papers? So of course the answer is you should cite both for their respective reasons. So you cite for an important part in your introduction, an important point that you're making, you cite the first paper that showed this. Just to be basically fair that this person or this group of authors were the first to make this particular point. That is just basically the definition of a citation, to pay an intellectual debt to somebody who has presented something for the first time. Of course, if this has been then shown repeatedly and has been solidified or has been improved upon and optimized in some way with new techniques, then of course it's completely fine and actually good practice to also cite more recent papers. So with that, for example, in papers or in proposals, you show, of course, that you're on top of the most recent literature. That can also be a quality criterion. But it would be wrong to only cite the most recent source available for a particular point that you are making, ignoring the earlier work that has been done. Now, you don't need to cite the entire lineage of research, of course. One point, it would be completely unreasonable unless you're writing a review paper on exactly that. But it would be a good idea to cite the first paper that has done something, and then also a more recent paper that has, for example, used a more advanced technique or showed it more broadly or something. So you can see citations, they can be quite tricky. It's not always straightforward to do it right. But I think if you just keep in mind these 3 points, broad point supported by a broader reference, a specific point supported by a specific reference, and then give credit to the first time a point has been made and also more recent references that have more recently supported the statement. Then I think you're already on a route towards successful citation practice. And then you're avoiding some of the more common mistakes that are typically made in terms of citing papers. Now there's much more to citing papers and who you cite, and we'll talk about that in some other video later. Hi there! If you like this video, don't forget to click like down there, and also remember to subscribe to the channel, and feel free to leave comments. See ya!